Miami Herald. So please welcome to the stage Mindy Marqués, executive editor of the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald, and George Hodge back to the stage. George is the project manager of the Florida Influencer Series and the 2018 Influencer Series chairman. Mindy and George.
Thank you.
Okay, not in that order. Keep going. Good morning.
Good morning.
So as Alex mentioned in her remarks earlier today, this is the culminating event after 6 months of hard work by our influencers, which is a group of 50 Floridians from the worlds of business, law, nonprofits, education, and the arts. So yesterday, the influencers gathered for a day of deeper discussion about the issues that you care about most. And the working groups have come up with detailed recommendations on each project. Today, the chairs of each working group are going to give one of their top recommendations. George?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry about that. It was a great pleasure to work with our group of influencers. You may have seen the story in today's Herald about their recommendations. They did a huge amount of work, and probably their biggest challenge is we're asking them to synthesize 1 or 2 recommendations into about 2 minutes this morning. So Chris, we're going to put you up first.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Chris Caines. I'm executive director of the Miami Urban Future Initiative at Florida International University. And I had the privilege of chairing our Transportation and Infrastructure Committee this summer. And you know, we are a diverse group of folks with diverse political outlooks on the world and come from different parts of our state and have different experiences. But we all came together in recognizing both the supply and demand challenges that come with supporting robust mass public transportation in our great state of Florida. We all believe that on the demand side, we need to find ways to boost public enthusiasm and get people excited about public transportation and looking at it as a viable option, both through educational efforts, but also through making it, improving service delivery and making it attractive from a supply side as well. So finding ways to prioritize in budgets and the hearts and minds of our elected officials to ensure that we don't have the level of transit cuts that we see throughout our state at a local and state level. You know, we really believe that in order to expect people to use public transportation, we need to find ways to make those services as robust and as fully functional as the currently over-subsidized kind of car industry and how we've decided to prioritize the region's cars culture. We also, kind of as a corollary, believe, and this is a little bit softer, but we'll say we would like to explore possible innovative approaches to revenue sharing of toll revenues and toll road revenues being perhaps used towards mass public transportation options as well.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's pretty good, pretty fast. Next up, we're going to have Cindy Arenberg Seltzer talk about education.
Thank you. Cindy Arenberg Seltzer. I'm the president and CEO of the Children's Services Council of Broward County, and I had the honor of chairing the Education Committee, which actually was quite united that the most important thing to improve education is money. If we look, believe it or not, that in order for the state to succeed economically, to be competitive in the global economy, we have to have a world-class education, and we need our legislators to understand that that is an investment in our future and not an expense. We have seen locally in South Florida, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade have all passed local referenda. Taxpayers have said we're willing to pay more to give us a world-class education. And so the big concern for our group was that those dollars, as well as the lottery dollars, actually be used to enhance education, not supplant general revenue. We'd like to see general revenue levels restored to where they should be, and then layer the lottery and the local money on top. In doing that, we can focus not only on of course, the basics of education, but also enhance social emotional learning, mental health services, and critical thinking, all which will help keep our students safe and should be prioritized equally, if not more so, than the hardening of our schools.
Great. Thank you very much, Cindy. Next up, I have Victoria Kasdan from We Care Manatee to talk about healthcare.
I'm Victoria Kasdan. I am a registered nurse in Florida. I'm a licensed insurance agent, and I currently run a nonprofit that provides free medical care to low-income uninsured in Bradenton. George gave us the daunting task of trying to solve healthcare. Nothing short of world peace, but together with some esteemed colleagues, we came up with some detailed information that built upon the feedback from the 50 Florida influencer groups. Florida is a sunshine state. You heard about the temperature here. We're the 3rd largest populated state. We have the 4th largest economy in the country. However, there's a dark cloud over Florida right now. We are ranked 49th in the nation with regards to access, with regards to affordability, with regards to affordable health care and health disparities. There are a lot of opportunities for improvement. The question that George gave us was, what was the recommendation we would make to the Florida legislators with regards to reducing the number of uninsured? We scratched our heads yesterday after 2.5 hours, thinking that's probably not the question. That is actually a symptom of a problem with affordability and high cost. That is what we would ask the Florida legislators to address as they look at covering the uninsured and all Floridians. We're all consumers of health care, so there's no reason that we all shouldn't be concerned about high cost and about affordability. It impacts us all. So the solution we came up with, one that we're going to have to really work with our legislators to address, and that is to expand Medicaid. Let's start there. It's the low-hanging fruit. There are only 14 states left in the nation who have not expanded Medicaid, and Florida is one of them, and one of the largest. In doing so, we think it might be more palatable to our legislators if they expanded Medicaid with some contingencies, including a waiver that if the government decides to reduce the percentage lower than 90%, all bets are off, with subsidies that encourage participation and provide more access. I am a registered nurse, but I'm not here to talk to you about health care in the sense of being a provider. I'm here to talk to you as a human being, and that's the way we should approach it with our legislators. I'm a big sci-fi fan, and what I'd like to say to them, in addition to our recommendation, comes from one of my favorite movies, Soylent Green. Dear legislators, these are not inanimate objects, the uninsured. These are people. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria.
Well done.
So next to solving healthcare, perhaps the biggest challenge in this group was a discussion of gun violence, and Rhea Law was gracious enough to take that panel and take control and come up with some thoughtful recommendations.
Thank you for that. I'm Rhea Law. I am the chair of Florida offices for Buchanan, Ingersoll, and Rooney. And I was asked to chair the gun discussion, and we talked about how difficult of an issue this is. To say we had a robust conversation is really an understatement. We talked a lot about all of the issues, and true to George's requirement that we only speak to 2 issues, and being a real lawyer, I'm going to give you 2 recommendations with several subsets to each one. So the first is do away with the loopholes, close the loopholes. Currently, our background checks are not done on all sales of firearms. So whether it's a private sale, whether it's a sale from a licensed dealer or it's over the internet, we should have background checks. And the second part to that is the background check needs to be meaningful. It needs to be done correctly, and it needs to be based upon the indices of fitness for owning and operating a firearm. With that in mind, we need to look at how we can capture mental health, substance abuse, domestic abuse. These are all things that impact one's fitness to have and operate a firearm. Then moving on to our second point, which is stand your ground. As you can imagine, there was a lot of discussion about this. And we actually saw that most of the discussion revolved around the fact that the law is not understandable either by us as the public, our law enforcement personnel, or our judges or anybody else at this point. And so to add some transparency to the issue, our recommendation is first to clarify that the immunity provisions does not mean that you do not have an investigation. If there's an incident, you will have an investigation. Secondarily, and more importantly, we need to make our elected officials as well as our law enforcement officers understand exactly what the criteria are. They need training, they need to understand best practices, and that will do a lot to bring some clarity to this current law that we have to understand how it might be utilized. The final thing I would say is the thing that brought together our group was the fact that we had a vision early on in the beginning of our discussion. What is it that we want our state to look like? What is it that we want our image to project? And I believe that if our elected officials were to look at it from that perspective, all of the issues that we're talking about in this panel will have an opportunity to be solved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rhea. Last but certainly not least is the environment, and pleased to have Julie Wraithmell from Audubon, Florida to talk about her group.
Thank you, George. I'm Julie Wraithmell. I'm the executive director of Audubon, Florida, and we believe that conservation doesn't have a party, and this panel definitely bore that out. Thank you so much to our panel's participants. We had representation from many sectors, including academia, tourism, real estate, the arts, as well as extractive industries. And regardless of our perspectives, everyone agreed that the environment is the business in Florida. The environment is our economy. Without taking action to protect that environment, our very future is jeopardized, and so it's very important that our incoming elected officials place a high priority on addressing the challenges that are facing us today. And those challenges are real, everything from climate change and sea level rise to water quality issues, water quantity issues, recovering our Everglades, which provides drinking water to the entire southeast coast. Urban sprawl, all of these were identified as our members as challenges that Florida is facing, but also opportunities. We have a tremendous amount of science expertise in this state, and it presents an opportunity for us to create new industries and new job creation in meeting these challenges, rather than simply accepting them as issues that will take away from our state. Finally, I would say we were tasked especially with identifying how should science play a role in this decision making, and everyone was very committed to not only encouraging our elected officials to make their decisions based on science, but also to stick with those science-based recommendations even when the going gets tough. And that's where the challenge comes in, is we're going to face some tough choices as a state, but we recognize that addressing these issues now is ensuring our future economic well-being, and making those choices now is the legacy that I think an elected official will be remembered for, not just at the end of their term, but for generations to come.
We do have a question from the audience that I think is relevant to all of you. It seems there's a lack of focus on the criminal justice system, which is one of the top 3 costs to our state. Wouldn't criminal justice reform save the state money that we could invest in education, the environment, healthcare, and transportation?
Who would like to tackle?
Well, I do agree that criminal justice reform is necessary, but I think our committee would argue, or I'll speak for myself, that fixing education will also contribute to criminal justice reforms. We have to stop the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline. We have to invest in those social emotional learning and critical thinking skills that help young people with decision making and pay our teachers. I neglected to say that earlier. When we get this additional money, a lot of that is to pay our teachers adequately so that we can both attract and retain quality teachers who can do so much in the classroom to help our children. So all of that, I mean, if we look at it as an investment, you will save on the criminal justice side in the end as well.
Other thoughts on that? Right. Mindy?
No, anybody else have thoughts? No, I think they want to die. They're done. Do we have any other questions from?
We do have one more. Cindy, please speak to the recent amendments approving teacher raises. In Miami-Dade, for instance, what will that really mean for the average teacher? It seems no one knows.
Well, I'm not an expert on Miami-Dade, but it was discussed in our panel yesterday, and I believe the minimum threshold was a $5,000 increase per teacher, but it was going to depend on longevity and some other factors that I'm not sure of, but I believe the floor that I was told yesterday was $5,000. That still leaves, I believe the way it was explained was $100 million would go for the first increase across the board, and that still leaves another $100 million that could then be distributed based on some other criteria. But that's just what I was told yesterday.
And the next question is directly for Chris. What are the ways the transportation can be made to look more attractive? Does this campaign happen best at the collegiate level or in grade school?
Mass transportation. So, I mean, I think we all have the potential to be transit users. I think especially in places where there's already dense populations of folks who are moving around. I think a lot of times people kind of say, well, you know, at least I'll use Miami-Dade County as an example, nobody's ever going to take public transportation from the west end of our county to the beach, to which I say, yeah, probably, but the person who can opt out of their car and opt into mass transportation in the urban core, getting their car off the road will actually alleviate transportation challenges for everybody, for the people who can't necessarily opt out of systems. I think education starts at an early age, but we also need to make sure that, you know, the actual service that we're providing is something that is as robust and as full as our car infrastructure as well. I think leading a horse to water and then not having any water for them there to drink is not a good solution to some of our transportation challenges. And then actually going back to it took me a minute to think about an answer to the question about prison reform and criminal justice reform, because it actually is an infrastructure issue, especially when we think about privatization of prisons and what it means when municipal governments and state governments contracts out and privatizes prisons and makes these contracts that then incentivizes people to essentially lock up our own residents and our own citizens. We need to stop making them. I think the first step to fixing a problem is to stop making it worse. And so I think that outlying private prisons might actually be a good start.
And a question for all of our chairs. What can be done to build bipartisan momentum for addressing the priorities addressed at this summit?
I want to start, Victoria, and go down.
I think one of the things we need to look at is to impress upon our legislators the humanity of some of the things that we're talking about, whether it's education, whether we're talking about gun violence, whether we're talking about the impact of the environment. Those are the things that we need to appeal to them. We need to appeal to them as people, not as party members. And really to go after the humanity as we look at solutions, whether that's gun control, whether that's prison reform, whether that's how to get from A to B in an effective and efficient manner. And so until we do that, until our politicians incorporate and encapsulate the humanity of some of the requests that we're making, I don't think we'll make progress.
I think there definitely is low-hanging fruit that we can come to a consensus on at the state level. But you know, there's really good research out there that shows about 20% of Americans trust federal government, about 50% trust state government, about 80% trust local government. I think empowering our local municipalities to make some of these decisions and then kind of letting people decide what kind of communities they want to live in actually is is a possible way forward. Right now we have really strong state preemption laws that prevent local municipalities from necessarily making decisions that are more responsive to their independent, constituent needs. So I actually think that, I'm optimistic that some of the challenges, especially around infrastructure and the environment that kind of impact everybody, can have some kind of coalition around. Nobody's going to oppose education. Nobody's going to oppose the environment. Nobody's going to oppose transportation. But the ways that getting to some of these solutions are so divisive that I genuinely believe, speaking for myself, that you're going to have to return power to some local municipalities in order to get some of the harder challenges actually addressed.
I think the Miami Herald has done a remarkable job in pulling together people from diverse backgrounds, diverse locations, and bringing them together in a safe environment to actually have these discussions. And using that mechanism to reach out to our elected officials, I think, is crucial. We have shown here by these groups that have come together that there are a number of us that, even though it's a very divisive issue, we're able to come to some consensus. And that's what we need to be showing to our elected officials. And I go back to the comment I made before, which is about the vision. We really can all coalesce around the fact that we want a safe environment, an inclusive environment for our state. And if we can agree to that, coming to the specific solutions that drive us to that result is what's going to drive our ultimate ability to reach consensus.
Yeah, and I would just echo, I think what the Herald has started here is really important. Bringing people together to talk face-to-face about these issues is critical. The reality is despite the hyper-partisanship of the elections do eventually end, and we move into the phase of governance. And we need people to be just as engaged after the election as they are partisan leading up to the election. It's not just enough to turn out the vote, but we need to turn out constituents and to keep people talking, to identify not just issues, but those solutions. Because the reality is the businesses that are hurting as a result of red tide and algal blooms belong to both owners of both parties, and they employ people of both parties, and tourists of both parties are making their choices about whether to come to Florida or not right now. These aren't partisan issues, and so we as citizens also need to lead on that front and show elected officials that regardless of the identifier on your voter registration, that these issues are universally important.
I agree with everything that's been said so far, and I would say in terms of the vision, we have separated somehow the conversations around taxes, which are evil, bad, just taking my money, and our expectations of government as if they can be delivered without the money to support them. And I think what we've seen in the local votes are that if people understand where the money is going, they don't mind paying it. It's when you just talk about taxes in the abstract. So if we can go back, and as was said in the gun panel, to the vision, what do we want? What kind of education do we want our young people to have? What kind of state do we want to live in? And what do we need to get there? The expectations that we have of our teachers, of our school boards, of our administrators are enormous. And if we want a thriving state, which I think, regardless of what letter you put next to your name, we all want that. And so let's focus on what we want to have and then the means to get there.
Our final question builds exactly on that point. These are recommendations you've created for elected officials. But what are recommendations from each of you for constituents?
Cindy, you want to start?
Yeah. Make your voice heard. I mean, don't sit back. One of the most exciting things to see over the last 2 years is the civic engagement, is people really waking up and understanding that it's not all the same, whoever's in charge, we're just victims of some mass blob over which we have no control. We've really seen that citizen voice can make a difference, and they have to stay engaged, not go, oh, I did my part, I voted, and now I can go back to sleep. We can never sleep again. We have to make sure that we recognize we live in a representative democracy, and our representatives need to know what we want.
And I would follow by saying there are remarkable resources available to educate yourself on just about any of these issues. And if you don't know enough about something, go learn. We really need different perspectives and different ideas coming to these issues, and it's not rocket science. There's great opportunities for people to become more informed and to, in turn, better inform that civic discussion. The reality is we need to be thinking about 10, 20, 30 years in the future, not just the next election. And so we need members of our society that are on these issues and in it for the long haul.
I so agree with both comments. It's for us to educate ourselves, to make sure that those around us are educated, and then bring them into the discussion. We're having this discussion in Miami, but these issues are statewide, they're national, they're everywhere, and we have a responsibility to those networks we have to reach out and say, this is your responsibility, this is your world, you are going to get exactly what you expect. So if you expect to have consensus and solutions, then you need to be demanding that of your elected officials, and you should be meeting with them, not just when they're in Tallahassee or in Washington. You need to be meeting with them saying, this is what we want for our state.
I would say kind of two quick things. First is not letting nostalgia from the past lead to preserving current failures. I think it's something that as constituents we need to be really forward-looking. The world is changing really, really quickly. Words like Uber and Lyft went from nonsense words to verbs really very fast. And when we think about how quickly the world is changing, it's something to keep in mind. And then the second part is just encouraging our elected officials to balance both immediate and urgent needs. And I think those are two different things. An urgent need is something that we need to do right now. Because there's an immediate need is something we need to do right now because there's some kind of immediate loss of life, there's some kind of tomorrow, something tragic is going to happen around gun violence or some of these other topics. But an urgent need is something that, even though it's not impacting us tomorrow, it's still, if we don't start working on it today, it's going to be even harder to work on it tomorrow. If big problems are scary today with long-term time horizons, how scary are those problems going to be with even shorter time horizons?
I think what I would say to the constituents is that it's time that the federal dollars that we send from Florida be spent for Florida, and that healthcare impacts us all. If there's an opportunity to expand Medicaid and add an additional 300,000 people to the insured component of our nation and our state, we should take that opportunity. We all need health care. It impacts not only the health of the individual, the family, the community, the state, and it's time that Florida had its chance to take advantage of that.
Well, thank you very much for this really terrific work. You've just heard one recommendation from each group, but in fact they have much more to present. And in Sunday's Miami Herald, we will be publishing a comprehensive report with the recommendations of each working group and their conclusions. And so with that, let's give all of our influencers, particularly the chairs who work really hard, a big round of applause. Thank you.
Mindy and George, thank you very much for sharing.